Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would review this little video by Dante's vaccination because I thought that it would be very interesting to talk about. And I thought that I would talk about Archer Benavidez's great performance over Marcus Brown yesterday, or at least somewhat of a great performance. For those of you overall that, of course, did not have the privilege of watching the fight yesterday, because some of you may have actually not known that it was actually on a Friday. I totally forgot that it was on the date of the 17th, and I did not know that that was this Friday. But I ended up watching the fight last night, and I got to say that when it comes to Artur Beterbiev, I am really, really impressed with this fighter. And I remember overall Artur Beterbiev when he first came out, everyone always said that he had a big amateur background. I never was as impressed with him when I first seen him. I thought that he was very stiff, very hittable. I thought that he was just the regular European fighter, that maybe I would see out of Russia or Germany or, one of those European countries. But over time, Artur Beterbiev really has proved me wrong within a certain amount of fights. And, the first mega fight that he ended up winning in his career was, of course, against that one Ukrainian fighter who had a very good amateur and Olympic background as well. I believe his name was either Gvozdyk or Vazdik. And unfortunately for Vazdik, he ended up actually retiring because of the amount of punishment that he took from Artur Beterbiev in that unification fight, where Artur Beterbiev ended up stopping him, I believe, either within about 9 or 10 rounds. I think that it was 10 rounds. But that dude Vazdik, he was no joke. That was also the same Vazdik that knocked out Adonis Stevenson in his last fight. Sure, Adonis Stevenson was a bit older, but Vazdik was able to do something that a certain amount of other fighters were not able to do at that recent time. Even a Badu Jack. So Vazdik was a real deal fighter. So 175 pounds, I think, actually has been a decently competitive division for the past several years. And Archer B2B, to be quite honest with you, this dude is a really, really, really big threat to anyone who is going to face him. And of course, he ended up getting the knockout over Marcus Brown. I believe the fight was stopped in the 9th round. If I'm wrong about that, someone corrects me. And I was expecting, a possibly tough fight, possibly even an upset over Archer B2B, because Marcus Brown, he is someone that, in my opinion, is a very talented fighter. He's very slick. He's very decently powerful. He's got great speed. He's an all-around good foundation of a fighter. He has a good foundation of skills. I would say that he's a decent, at least for the Division A grade fighter. Now, of course, he does have one loss on his record. He did lose to Jean Pascal, but that also was because the fight had to be stopped early because of a head clash. And unfortunately for Marcus Brown, he really did not get a chance to kind of, get back at him and kind of, make up for some of those mistakes that he ended up doing by getting knocked down a couple times. So, I don't know. I don't want to say that there's an asterisk next to that, but it's just a little bit unfortunate. But Marcus Brown, he was basically coming into this fight, I'm not going to say undefeated, but he was coming into this renewed, in my opinion. He was coming into this fight decently confident. And I think that Marcus Brown, he was coming into this fight as a very dangerous opponent. And I was expecting a back and forth fight. I thought that Marcus Brown, I thought that he gave him a very, tough first 2 rounds. I think that I'd scored the first 2 rounds for Marcus Brown. Every round after that, I scored for Archer Beterbiev. He showed up very, very well. And all in all, especially compared to his last performance where he had a little bit of problems, I was expecting possibly Archer Beterbiev to even maybe get upset. Now, I did favor Beterbiev to win this fight. But when it comes down to it, like I said, I would have not been surprised had Artur Beterbiev been upset in this fight, because he has not been as active as he has needed to for the past couple of years. And on top of that, when it comes down to it, he is getting up there in age. He is 36 years old. So the fact that he was able to put on this type of performance, was extremely phenomenal. I really don't even know how else to put it. And the big question now is, who is going to face Artur Beterbiev next? Is it going to be Dimitri Bivol? Is it going to be, Joe Smith Jr.? Or is it possibly going to be Canelo Alvarez after Canelo Alvarez handles his possible business against Ilunga Makabu? And that's going to be a very interesting question. And this is why I've been saying for the past couple of years, in my opinion, a lot of people, they always say that, oh, Canelo, he needs to face Charlo and Andrade and Benavidez. And I agree, those fights need to happen eventually. But there is no bigger threat to Canelo Alvarez right now, at least if he stays in peak form. And we don't know how much longer that's going to be, because he is up there in age. The biggest threat, as long as he's at his best, to Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, is Mr. Artur Beterbiev. Not only does he have a decent foundation of boxing skills, but this dude's power is on a completely another level. Like they said, he is the only champion in boxing right now that has a 100% knockout ratio. I would still say that pound for pound, Deontay Wilder still probably is the hardest puncher in all the sport, at least debatably. But Artur Beterbiev is right there. And one thing I'll say about Artur Beterbiev is that this dude has not only knocked out decent fighters, he's knocked out Olympic pedigree fighters like Vazdik. I'm not sure what Marcus Brown's Olympic pedigree or amateur pedigree would be, but he's a very decent boxer as well. And Beterbiev is literally toying with some of these fighters. He is literally just torturing them basically inside the ring. I mean, he literally made Marcus Brown quit in that ring. Marcus Brown took the 10 count. It's not like he was knocked out basically and, what was knocked out to where he was blacked out. He took the 10 count. He consciously took it. And I don't have a problem with that because I'm not the one taking the punishment. I'm not going to criticize you for that. But that just shows you the elite level of not only his skills, but also his power. This dude's power is, I mean, it's really almost dangerous. So we'll see overall what happens. But anyways, I wanted to review Dante's Boxing Nation video because more than likely, not only is he going to talk about this fight, but he's more than likely going to be talking about a possibility of there being a Canelo Alvarez versus Artur Beterbiev fight as well, which is a fight that interests me. And like I said, in my opinion, there is no bigger threat to Canelo Alvarez right now than that of Artur Beterbiev. The only other one that I would say possibly may even be a bigger threat if this fight even were to happen would be an Alexander Usyk. But I don't know if Canelo would take that fight because I just think that Usyk is a little bit too big for him. So we'll see about that. But anyways, let's see what Dante has to say. Let's get into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Artur Beterbiev, he gets a 9th round stoppage in a very impressive win against Marcus Brown. Beterbiev, he started off slow, giving up the first 2 rounds. It looked like it might even be a little competitive after the first 2 rounds. But man, when Beterbiev started letting his hands go, it's crazy because Marcus Brown was playing the role as the boxer. Artur Beterbiev was playing the role as the aggressor. But the crazy thing is, Beterbiev was the better boxer even when he was aggressive, which makes...
I agree. And there was a certain amount of people that, I've seen a certain amount of people, especially, certain demographic cheering for Marcus Brown. But you know what? I get it at the end of the day. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But, certain European fighters, especially Caucasian European fighters, sometimes they do tend to be a little bit stiff. Sometimes they don't tend to have the best head movement. And I think that, that stereotype when it comes down to it, which some of the times can be true when it comes down to it, I think a certain amount of people were taking a look at it and saying, well, Marcus Brown has a real chance to win here because Artur Beterbiev, he sure is powerful, but he's hittable. And on top of that, maybe Marcus Brown, maybe he can get something going here. And I understood where they were coming from. Like I've seen former champion K9 Cornelius Bunridge, I believe is his name. I seen him talk on Twitter and he said, oh, Artur Beterbiev, he's just got power and that's it. But, and I understand to a degree where he's coming from, but if you've watched Artur Beterbiev before, you do know that he also has a decent foundation of skills. And to be quite honest with you, this is probably the most impressive performance that I've ever seen Artur Beterbiev put on. Each and every single fight, his head movement gets better, his defense gets better. I think that his intelligence for boxing gets better. Artur Beterbiev looked absolutely phenomenal in this fight. He looked phenomenal. Now, I don't think that he looked like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Terrence Bud Crawford in terms of the, or Canelo Alvarez in terms of the head movement when it comes down to it, but it's gotten better. He was able to avoid a certain amount of the shots. And also another good thing about Artur Beterbiev is that he keeps his hands up a lot. So that's a good thing about Artur Beterbiev as well. Very defensively responsible.
Him a very dangerous, complete fighter at the light heavyweight division. Artur Beterbiev was extremely accurate with all of his punches. He had great...
I said in a video yesterday that I did that when it comes at least to the Caucasian fighters, now, no matter what demographic it is, there's not many fighters overall that, in the boxing scene, in my opinion, are going to be ranked as A+. Let me say this about Artur Beterbiev. He might have to be ranked as the A+. He might have to be ranked up there in terms of the other A+ Caucasian fighters that I have in boxing today. I have Alexander Usyk as A+. I have Tyson Fury as A+. And if I have another one, maybe Vasyl Lomachenko. But he also does have to prove to me that he can win some of those bigger fights at 135. But, Josh Taylor, I think that he's good, but I don't know if I would rank him as A+ in terms of skills, at least for his division. I don't know if I would say that, but I can see some of the debates. Artur Beterbiev might have to be in that class. This dude, like I said, I thought that Marcus Brown was going to be a real potential threat to possibly winning this fight. and he completely, I mean, you know, I don't want to say that it was a cakewalk, but after round 2, I mean, he was pretty much able to completely walk him down.
Punch selection. There's no doubt about it, Marcus Brown, he made the fight easier for Benavidez because all Marcus would do is he would back up to the ropes, go into the high guard, and wait to counter. But the problem was...
Well, I think Marcus Brown was doing a good job within the first couple rounds. In my opinion, Marcus Brown, he was going to have to try to fight with Artur Beterbiev on the inside a little bit. But even that's a little bit of a challenge because Artur Beterbiev, he's a person that can fight on the inside very well as well. In fact, when you've seen it against Gvozdyk, who actually, all in all, just taking a look at it, probably is a better all-around fighter than that of a Marcus Brown. But even when Gvozdyk was trying to fight him on the inside, Beterbiev is a very good counterpuncher on the inside. And he crushes you to the body when it comes down to it. So there's just almost no escape from this guy's power. Like I said, you know, this guy, he's a real dangerous threat.
He would allow Beterbiev to get off about 5 to 6 punches before Brown would come back with maybe 1 or 2 punches. And Marcus was never accurate with his punches. He was
somewhat accurate within the first couple rounds. But like I said, let me get Beterbiev credit. He was able to keep his hands up the majority of the time. He was very, very defensively responsible. So it was very hard for Marcus Brown, who in my opinion is an A-grade talented fighter, at least an A- fighter. You know, after this, you maybe could debate him as a B-class fighter, but coming into this fight, you could debate him at least as an A- fighter. And Artur Beterbiev, I mean, yeah, he had that blood, but that, of course, that was from a head clash. He got hit with some punches here and there, but there was never any punches that I seen that were super-duper flush. So I give Artur Beterbiev a hell of a lot of credit.
Throwing these hard shots, but they were just air balls. Once again, Beterbiev, he was landing the majority of the punches that he was throwing. Now, even though this wasn't the best competition in the world for Artur Beterbiev, I still believe his performance was so impressive.
I actually disagree. I think that Marcus Brown, I think that actually he's a very decent fighter. I think that Marcus Brown was a big sleeper coming into this fight. Now, once again, of course, he did lose to Jean Pascal, but that was a very competitive fight. And on top of that, you know, Marcus Brown, he could have potentially came back in that fight and won it. Unfortunately, like I said, it was stopped, you know, due to a head clash, and it went to the scorecards. So that was a little bit unfortunate. Now, one could maybe argue that Marcus Brown, he hasn't been the same mentally ever since that loss. Maybe one would argue that, but still, man, Marcus Brown, he's a person all in all that very dangerous coming into this fight. Like, he kind of reminds me of like Julian J. Rock Williams when Julian J. Rock Williams, he was knocked out against Jamal Charlo, but then after that, you know, he still was dangerous. He still was highly skilled. Now, of course, Julian J. Rock Williams, after we've seen him lose to multiple B and C class fighters, we can't say that he's any longer at least an A-grade fighter. Marcus Brown, in my opinion, you could still debate maybe as an A- fighter. I'm just not sure if he would be, you know, an A+ or A-grade fighter. But he's highly skilled. You know, Artur Beterbiev was just completely able to outskill him, and he was completely able to outbrawl him.
That Canelo Alvarez most likely won't be interested in this fight.
And here we go. This is the reason why I decided to review this video, because, like I said, he is going to use whatever name he can possible to try and tear down Canelo Alvarez.
Do you guys remember before the Canelo versus Caleb Plant fight, Eddie Hearn, he told the boxing world, he said Canelo said he wants Beterbiev next. I told Canelo, why don't you take the Bivol fight next? And he said, no, I want the Beterbiev fight. And I'm paraphrasing, but Eddie Hearn, he said, man, that's the type of warrior that Canelo Alvarez is. And then, of course, right after the Caleb Plant fight, he fights a guy by the name of Makabu, or at least he's trying to fight Makabu next. A guy that has been knocked out twice and is nowhere near on the level of course, a Beterbiev.
Well, I don't think that he's on the level of a Artur Beterbiev, that's true, but like I said, I don't mind the Makabu fight happening, and I've already explained multiple times why, because I think that it's a title chase, but it clearly is at least a decent matchup because, you know, like I said, at least if Canelo lets him rehydrate fully, once again, Makabu is not a true, Canelo is not a true cruiserweight. You know, he's not even really a true light heavyweight. So,
a Bivol, a Charlo, an Andrade, a David Benavidez. We know what time it is. There's also a reason why none of those other...
Like Canelo Alvarez going up to cruiserweight, that would almost be like Gervonta Tank Davis at least going up to welterweight. and possibly facing like I'm trying to think of a comparison, you know, to compare it to. But Gervonta, he may even be able to handle himself more at welterweight than what Canelo could possibly at cruiserweight, at least against the elite guys. Because Gervonta, he's extremely powerful, and when it comes down to it, you know, he's decently built. So, you know, it may even have to compare it to 154. But I don't know if I'd say that. But it would be like Gervonta Tank Davis moving up to 147 and, you know, possibly beating someone like, say, Anijas Kavalauskas, you know, or maybe someone that would be a little bit bigger at 154 that would have decent power but wasn't an A-grade fighter. You know, maybe like if Gervonta Tank Davis moved up to 154 and defeated that one kid that just recently lost to Erickson Lubin, that, you know, Rojas guy, whoever the hell that guy is.
Fighters have been calling out Makabu. Have you guys ever thought about that? Bivol, Beterbiev, no one has called out Makabu, right? Because they know that that's not a challenge. Gilbert.
Well, it's not a challenge for them, you know, because once again, you know, John Ruiz, he wouldn't be that big of a challenge for Lennox Lewis. He wouldn't be that big of a challenge for certain people that maybe would be at light heavyweight. But for Roy Jones Jr., like I said, you know, it was a decent challenge because he's not as big as a heavyweight.
So Ramirez is calling out Bivol. Bivol is calling out Ramirez, Beterbiev, right? Everyone is calling out the dangerous opponent in their own division. And Canelo is the only one talking about fighting the easiest level of opposition. Things are really getting interesting now. Because if Canelo fights at 175, which he's being pressured to do by Eddie Hearn, DAZN, and many other fans, he's either pressured to fight at 175 or fight the lineal champion, the best fighter at 168, which is David Benavidez. What David Benavidez...
Like I said, Canelo Alvarez, he's going to have a lot of pressure on himself because he is the number one pound-for-pound fighter. That means that you're going to have to face consistent, great competition. So after this Makabu fight, even though, of course, it is a decent challenge, he cannot get away overall facing another B-grade fighter. He's going to have to face overall, you know, another A-grade fighter. Now, if he wants to go maybe after someone else in the cruiserweight division like a Maris Bradis, I don't think that necessarily would be a bad fight. Maris Bradis, maybe at least for the division, you could debate as an A-grade fighter. But Canelo, in my opinion, after the Makabu fight, he is going to have to go after Bivol or Beterbiev, or, you know, he is going to have to go after Charlo or Andrade or Benavidez, one of those guys. If I had to guess, more than likely, he may go after Charlo or Benavidez, but we'll see what happens.
And all the fighters at 175 have in common is they all have power. You see, Canelo Alvarez, if you notice, the majority of opponents...
They all have power, but there ain't no one overall within that division that has the same power as Beterbiev. I mean, Joe Smith, I believe that he's a champion there. You know, Joe Smith is a decently good fighter, but, you know, I don't see him really beating Canelo. I just think Canelo's too good for him. You know, Dimitri Bivol, possibly. But Bivol, to me, has not really looked as impressive within the past couple of years. He still looks A-grade. Don't get me wrong. I still think that he's a great fighter. But Beterbiev is the only one that I take a look at and I say, if this dude is at his best, Canelo was really... Like I said, this is the only guy in Beterbiev that I would say this is a true 50-50 test for Canelo.
He's faced.
If Beterbiev would not even... You know, there's a possibility that Beterbiev may even be favored over Canelo.
They didn't have power. He was the only one with all of the power, right? The last time Canelo Alvarez been in the ring with someone who had power that was equal to his or more was Golovkin. In both of those fights...
Well, that's the thing overall. Now, if certain people want to say that, well, Canelo, he's not facing people with great power like Caleb Penn or Billy Joe Saunders, I would somewhat understand that. But the problem is this. If you're talking about someone overall that, you know, has... you know, greater power than him or equal power, that's the problem. No one really has equal or greater power than Canelo Alvarez throughout these weight divisions. It's not David Benavidez. You know, it certainly isn't Demetrius Andrade. Jamal Charlo, maybe you could debate, but I mean, even his power level, I'm not sure if it compares to Canelo's. Like I said, the only fighter actually in Canelo Alvarez's career that he fought with, you know, power that was greater than his was Gennady Golovkin. That was it. So, you know, it is what it is. And, of course, he was able to get past him. Now, if you want to make the argument that Canelo, that his past couple of fights, sure, they've been against A-grade fighters, but they haven't really been against guys with elite A-grade power, you know, you could argue that. I don't have a problem with that. But like I said, Billy Joe and... Actually, you know what? Let's talk about Calum Smith for a minute, because Calum Smith was a guy actually with A-grade power. A lot of people really underestimate that dude's power. That is a guy that has a great power.
In controversy, right? Now, don't get me wrong. You can have power and have zero skill, like a Macaboo, but the difference is all those.
Well, that's the thing about Macaboo. I don't think that he does have zero skill. I think that, like I said, I favor Canelo 70-30 in that fight, but there's a reason why I give Macaboo a good 30% chance. Canelo has to be very careful because Macaboo is a person that is decently big, and he's a person all in all that has very decent power. He's a person overall that he is not as badly skilled as many people overall like to pretend that he is.
Fighters that I just mentioned, they have power and they have skill to go with it, and they have an undefeated record to go with it, right? Macaboo, who's a cruiserweight, of course he's going to have some kind of power, but someone who has no defense.
It's not really even some sort of power. Macaboo has very decently good power. Almost great power. Like when you take a look at Macaboo's record, like I said, he has, I believe, 28 total wins in his career. You know how many knockouts he has? He has 25. That means that, when he's fighting these guys, at least the guys that he can handle, he's sleeping these guys. So like I said, Macaboo, he's not someone to be underestimated here.
No chin, no rhythm, no coordination, no speed. Really, all he has is a belt. And that's the reason why Canelo would rap.
Well, like I said, if this were Artur Beterbiev versus Macaboo, I would possibly agree with you. But it's not Artur Beterbiev versus Macaboo. It's Canelo versus Macaboo.
They fight him as opposed to fighting a Bivol or a Beterbiev. But the walls are closing in. At least it always seems like the walls are closing in. But I tell you, man, Canelo is far more elusive outside of the ring than he is inside of the ring.
Since I started new,
I've lost 70 pounds.
I've lost 97 pounds with new.
I've lost 92.
Right when you think you got him cornered. In fact, speaking of being cornered,
I guess that was a shot overall at Canelo Alvarez's skill set. When you take a look at Canelo, like I said, there's no fighter, in my opinion, at least in terms of today's fighters. So I'm not necessarily talking about all time. Although Canelo, he may get up there eventually, but, at least in the conversation is one of the best defensive fighters of all time. Not necessarily as the greatest, but Canelo, in my opinion, in terms of today's fighters, whether you want to compare him to Vasily Lomachenko or Tyson Fury or Crawford or Spence or Devonta Tank Davis, or it doesn't really matter, which fighter you compare him to today. Alexander Usyk, there really is no fighter, in my opinion, today, at least from what I've seen, at Canelo Alvarez's peak. There is no fighter, in my opinion, that is greater defensively at this point in time. I'm talking about fighters that are currently in boxing right now. So certain people, when they hear me state that, they say, wow, you're saying he's the greatest defensive boxer of all time? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily putting him on that Sweet Pea Pernell Whitaker, level as of yet, or Floyd Mayweather Jr. level. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know if he will be on that Floyd level because Floyd was phenomenal. But, and of course Canelo is as well. But Floyd, of course, he is debatably, in my opinion, the greatest fighter of all time. And of course, certain people disagree, but it just is what it is. Floyd is debatably, at least in my, in my conversation for that. As well as Manny Pacquiao, Roberto Duran, possibly Chavez and Leonard and Hagler, Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, Rocky Marciano, other fighters, blah, blah, blah. It is what it is.
Canelo Alvarez fans, I remember they were the ones that were saying, before the Caleb Plant fight, they was like, man, stop hating on Canelo. You don't have to worry. He has no one else to fight. Of course he's going to fight either David Benavidez or Charlo next. Who else can he fight, right? All of a sudden, he pulls a Macaboo out of his ass, and those same fans are...
He pulls a Macaboo out of his ass. Oh, man. Dante's so pissed off. But like I said, I understand where Dante is coming from a little bit, but like I said, I don't mind the Macaboo fight. Because Macaboo, like I said, he's a legitimate cruiserweight, and as long as Canelo Alvarez does not do a rehydration clause, or at least a mega one, or if he does not drain him, then I will give Canelo Alvarez full credit overall for beating Macaboo. But after Macaboo, you are going to have to face one of these other A-grade fighters. Like I said, who does that mean? That means Bivol, that means Beterbiev, that means Benavidez, Charlo, and what's his name, Andrade. You're going to have to get all those fighters. Maybe if he were to face a Joe Smith Jr. next, because I believe that he's a current champion at light heavyweight, that would be possibly acceptable. Just because maybe if you want to face a more skilled fighter at light heavyweight to get in preparation for Artur Beterbiev or Dimitri Bivol. So like I said, that would be acceptable. But we'll see what happens.
Down defending Canelo. Instead of saying, okay, yeah, I thought he was going to take the tough challenges, but yeah, you're right, Dante. He is trying to find the easy way out. We know what time it is, guys.
Well, like I said, I don't think overall that it's an easy way out because Makabu is a person that he's a real threat. He's a person that, like I said, he's going to be a lot bigger than Canelo. He has very decent power, and I don't think that he has A-grade skills, but like I said, Makabu is not a person with C-grade skills either. He's a person that, he can box a little bit. Go ahead, take a look at his highlights. Go ahead, take a look at some of his fights. Especially recently, he's not bad.
He always finds some guy we've never heard of. Right now, it looks like he's cornered.
He always finds some guy that we've never heard of. Was Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant and Calum Smith guys that we never heard of? Come on. Now, of course, if you want to say like a Rocky Fielding or Avni Yildirim, I suppose so. But like I said, those are just every once in a while. Like I said, for every one fight that Canelo has that's against a C-grade fighter, he fights 2 or 3 in a row that are usually A-grade.
Even if he takes the Makabu fight, you ask yourself, where does he go from there? Because we know Makabu...
Well, like I said, if Canelo, after the Makabu fight, he is going to have to face someone that is A-grade after that fight, no doubt about it, or he is going to get a lot of criticism. He is going to have his back up against the wall, no doubt about it. So we'll see what he does. Like I said, who does that mean that he has to fight? That means Demetrius Andrade, David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo, Artur Beterbiev, Dimitri Bivol, if I didn't mention him already, or maybe Joe Smith Jr. I could potentially see that one, but we'll see what happens.
Is one of the weakest fighters, not one of the weakest champions. He's one of the weakest fighters in that division at cruiserweight. And the fight, realistically, is not even at the cruiserweight limit. The fight is at 190 because of the made-up...
Well, like I said, we'll see about that. The WBC has tried to, do that in the past, but that does not necessarily mean that it will be at 190. We'll see what happens. Like I said, we'll see at weigh-ins.
WBC creates. So let's just look at all of these potential options for Canelo Alvarez. At super middleweight, once again, you have David Benavidez, who is the lineal champion, the best fighter at 168, right?
Well, that's unproven. Like I said, a lot of people, they always want to say that, but David Benavidez has 0 A-grade wins in his career. It just is what it is. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Billy Joe Saunders or Caleb Plant, that they just had definitively a better resume. But like I said, a lot of people, they take a look at David Benavidez. I don't know why so many people take a look at David Benavidez and just think that he's such much more of a threat, just because, he's knocked some people out. David Benavidez is a decent fighter, but really all he has overall, in my opinion, over Caleb Plant, at least in terms of a threat, I mean, he has natural size over him, and of course he has power. There is almost no skill set, including footwork, head movement, defensive responsibility, in my opinion, that David Benavidez beats Caleb Plant in. The only thing that he beats him in is natural power and overall size. That's really about it. Now, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that once again, David Benavidez would not beat Caleb Plant in a fight, but like I said, styles make fights. And I think that Caleb Plant was a more challenging style for Canelo because Canelo, once again, in the past, he has shown problems against those defensive type of opponents. I don't think that David Benavidez is the style to beat Canelo. I just don't, because I think David Benavidez is going to come straight at Canelo. I think that Canelo is going to be too defensively responsible. I think he's going to catch him. And I think once David Benavidez realizes that Canelo Alvarez has the type of power that he has, not only do I think that he may get dropped a couple times, but I think all in all that David Benavidez, he's going to start backing up. And David Benavidez, I'm not sure how good of a fighter he is backing up, but we'll see what happens.
He still has the Charlo fight.
Now, once again, all that is alleged. That's my analysis. That doesn't mean that I don't want to see that fight because, of course, David Benavidez, he still is a great challenger. So he is going to have to face David Benavidez at least eventually if David Benavidez remains undefeated. But that's why, in my opinion, at least that's my analysis, that's my opinion of what will happen. But we'll see.
Charlo will definitely come up to 168 to fight Canelo Alvarez. Then you have the light heavyweight division, which is really, really a stacked division, especially for someone like Canelo. You have Bivol, you have Beterbiev, you have Joe Smith, And now Joe Smith's mandatory is Anthony Yard. Anthony Yard just came off of a very impressive rematch win, stopping, was it Arthur Williams, I believe? Hopefully that was...
It's interesting that he's saying that it's a stacked division, but I bet as soon as Canelo Alvarez, if he beats any of those guys, he's going to say that it's a weak division. You know, because those guys, they've been saying that it's a weak division for a while, because once again, they don't want someone like Artur Beterbiev super high in the pound-for-pound list. You know, that's why Dante, he won't praise Artur Beterbiev and say that Artur Beterbiev is one of the top 10 pound-for-pound fighters in the world, even though you certainly could debate him as such. You know, he may even have to be entered into the top 10 pound-for-pound right after this fight for me. But when it comes down to it all in all, you know, Dante, he'll use Artur Beterbiev's and Dimitri Bivol's name overall to tear down Canelo because there's a bigger picture at stake. But in terms of ranking them highly on the pound-for-pound list, he ain't going to do that.
His name. And then you have the cruiserweight champions, the real cruiserweight champions. See, this is something you guys didn't think about. If Canelo Alvarez was going to fight a real cruiserweight champion, and we're not talking about through the WBC, he would have to fight someone at 200 pounds. Once again, because of all of the BS that's going on with the WBC.
Well, like I said, he still may face him at 200 pounds. I don't know if it's really necessarily going to be 100% at 190. We'll see what happens.
He's able to fight a cruiserweight 10 pounds lighter. That's like somebody fighting for the light heavyweight title at 165 pounds as opposed to 175. So let's see if Canelo Alvarez is going to step up in competition and take on an actual challenge this time. Or is he going to pull another Macaboo out of his ass?
Well, like I said, I doubt that he'll be able to pull out another Macaboo because I don't think that another Macaboo will arise. But we'll see what happens. It'll be very interesting to see what Canelo Alvarez takes. But he'll basically have no choice because, you know, who is he going to face after, Macaboo or Macaboo? You know, we don't really know, but it'll be very interesting. Personally, I think that Canelo probably has his eyes on Jamal Charlo. That's if he decides to go back to those later on divisions. Or maybe he is going to face a Joe Smith Jr. or an Artur Beterbiev, someone like that. Because Canelo has expressed interest, I think, in some of those fighters.
For you Canelo fans that say the most ridiculous things like, hey, he can fight whoever he wants. He can fight whoever he wants. How does a boxer fighting whoever they want benefit boxers?
Well, Canelo Alvarez overall, he does have the option to fight whoever he wants. But at the end of the day, like I said, you know, even not a duty to the fans, but he has a duty to himself overall to face the best of the best. That way his career can be remembered as an all-time great one. And like I said, I already think that Canelo, just by looking at him and the series of wins that he has already, Canelo is very clearly an all-time great fighter. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You know, at least in terms of the skills, but even the resume. Canelo Alvarez, he's the real deal. There's no doubt about it. But like I said, if he wants his resume to debatably be up there within the top 10 greats of all time, if he wants to debatably be within the top 10 boxers of all time, the Sugar Ray Leonards, the Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s, the Marvin Haglers, the Manny Pacquiao's, the Rocky Marcianos, you know, the Muhammad Ali's, you know, the Roy Jones Jr.'s, those guys, if you want to be up there with them, the Julio Cesar Chavez's, you know, of course, senior, not junior for Christ's sake. But when it comes down to it all in all, if Canelo wants to be up there with them, he is going to have to defeat every single A-grade competitor, or at least the majority of them, if he wants to be remembered as such. I think the Macaboo move, like I said, is a decent move for him, because I understand why he's doing it. It's a title chase for history. I understand. But if you're going overall, you know, to do that, after that fight, you have to face someone who's A-grade.
Boxing fans. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? That means you're saying you're not even a boxing fan. You're saying you're a race fan. You're saying you don't care if the fans don't get the fights that they want. As long as he can keep saying that he's winning, that's all that matters to you. In no sport will you ever hear fans say, hey man, the teams can play against whoever they want. In every other sport, you watch those sports.
Like I said, you know, I understand Dante's point, and I think that he makes a good point here, but like I said, Dante is such a hypocrite because he'll talk all this shit with Canelo Alvarez, but then when it comes to Deontay Wilder not wanting to face Dillian White, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, he makes all these bullshit excuses, or Gervonta Tank Davis not facing A-grade competition. He makes all these bullshit excuses. So once again, Dante, you know, if you're going to talk all that shit about Canelo, no problem. We'll talk all that shit also about Gervonta Tank Davis or Deontay Wilder. He won't do it.
because you know.
And like I said, I don't talk on Canelo Alvarez like that because I believe that Canelo Alvarez usually at least is facing A-grade competition. Now, once again, if he faces Makabu and gets past him, and if he ends up still not facing an A-grade fighter after that, or at least a fighter that is a notable champion or contender, then he is going to get criticism from me because then there's basically no excuse. But we'll see what happens.
At the end of the season, there's going to be a conclusion. And we're going to find out who the best team is in that sport, right? In that league. And that's the exact way it's supposed to be in the sport of boxing. You will never hear me say, man, Terrence Crawford can fight whoever he wants. As long as Terrence Crawford is still active and he...
No, you won't say that specifically when it comes down to it, but you make excuses to why he faces weak opponents. Or you'll basically, say that when he's facing C or B grade fighters, you'll try to upgrade his competition into more of a better perspective than what it actually is. Like you said, Aegis Velasquez was a really great opponent, and, Terrence Crawford, he's facing decent competition. Like, what are you talking about? But then Canelo faces Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, and he's allegedly cherry picking. Like, come on.
He's still a champion.
And I understand some people's perspectives overall where they say, well, Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, they don't have the power of an Andre or Jamal Charlo. Well, that's understandable, but at the end of the day, like I said, those fighters, they're somewhat on a similar level. Because, like I said, just talking about power, there is no fighter overall that has enough power, in my opinion, or at least has the skills combined with the power to really give a whole lot of trouble to Canelo. Because, like I said, Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, if you want to argue those guys are less dangerous than Charlo and Andre, I mean, that's your business. Personally, I would understand the Andre point. I don't think that either of those fighters are less dangerous than Charlo. I mean, obviously, Charlo has a decent amount more power than them, but in terms of boxing skills, I think that he's a decent boxer, but Charlo just has way too many flaws.
Right? And he's still in his prime? You're never going to hear me say that. If I am going to say that, it's going to be after he retires. And he wants to do exhibitions like Floyd Mayweather. Then you'll hear me say, man, he can do whatever he wants. The man is retired. He's not trying to be pound for pound the best fighter in the world. That's the only time you should be able...
I agree. With that, what I will say is this. If you're going to be the pound for pound best in the world, you do have to face consistent A-grade competition.
To say,
or at least beat every A-grade contender available.
This person can fight whoever he wants is if that person is not claiming that he's the best in the world. If that person has accepted, I ain't gonna never be the best, or I used to be the best, I don't care who the best is now. I just want to go out and, get a couple checks and call it a day. That's when you can say that kind of stuff.
And that's what Dante's problem is at the end of the day with Canelo Alvarez. Because, once again, you don't want Canelo Alvarez to be the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Is it because, overall, do I think that he truly believes that Canelo Alvarez is just completely cherry-picking? No, he just doesn't want Canelo Alvarez as the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Because, like I said, we just seen a video yesterday where he completely commended Jamal Charlo, for possibly fighting Caleb Plant next. But when Canelo Alvarez fought him, it was a complete cherry-pick.
But not when you want to claim.
So what does that say about Dante's opinion on Canelo Alvarez? He knows, he can say all this bullshit all he wants to. He can say overall, because he said in multiple videos that, Canelo ain't even on the level of a Stephen Fulton and a Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Andre. He knows that he's above them. It is what it is.
That person that you're defending is the best fighter in the world. With that being said, let's see if Arthur Beterbiev gets his shot at Canelo Alvarez. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
I was eating because I was stressed out. Candy bar.
Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. And we'll see if Arthur Beterbiev does get potentially his shot over Canelo Alvarez. But I don't know if a lot of people are going to be rushing into that fight because Arthur Beterbiev is a really, really dangerous fighter. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's all I got for right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.